for children. She is a numbers lady. She retired and having last work at Clemson University in South Carolina. She lives near Clemson with her husband Bill, and they have a son, Mike. Since she retired, she has put her research skills into the field of genealogy. She keeps a website entitled Mast Family Stories, and she's written articles on Uncle Johannes and John of 1750, and they've been published in Mennonite Family History magazine. Her latest is a brand new book entitled Left Behind in the North Carolina. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Left Behind in the North Dakota Prairie. And it's available for the first time here at this Mast gathering. She's also sharing some of her Mast collections in the exhibit room. You'll want to see diaries, journals, ledgers that help tell the story of the Masts here in this valley. In her talk this morning, Dot will update us on the 2 Mast uncles and the 4 known nieces and nephews who've come to America. What happened to them? What happened to their children? She hopes that maybe a few of these stories you've not heard before. Please help me welcome Dot Mast Moss.
Thank you, Bernadine. I have trouble standing behind a pulpit. I think I might be like my grandfather, Isaac S. Mast, who was known as the Mennonite Billy Sunday. So I just can't stand behind one. And so I'll walk around a little bit. And Bill, I got to take care of a little family matter. Where's Linda? I think her purse is over there. I hope she's not looking for it. Oh, there she is. Is your purse? Okay. I thought that was yours. Sorry. Family comes first. So my research is a little bit different maybe than some other people because, well, I came into it recently, and I come into it as a researcher who knew how to dig into the internet. So I like to find our old stories and find out the truth in them, or whether they're false, or where that little grain and nugget came from. So I like to find original documents. I like to talk to people and find out what they heard about the same thing. So the documents that I'm using in this presentation, and land records and wills and other things, I've copied and I put in a portfolio for the auction. So if you want these documents, that's where to get them. And also, I want to tell you this up front, that I'll put this PowerPoint presentation and all my notes on the website, Mast Family Stories. But if you are not an internet user, if you will make sure I get your name and address, I will mail you anything from it. All right? I'm going to get rid of some of these things in my hand. So just a little reminder of the relationships of us here in this room. So I call Jacob of 1737 Uncle Jacob. I call Johannes Uncle Johannes. And I call the children the orphans, because that's just an easy way for me to remember all these people who have the same names. So I'll try to be clear who I'm talking about as we go through this. And I have the children's father's name as Joseph up there. I should have it in italics because we're not sure. But I did my DNA on Ancestry, and there's a new thing on Ancestry called Through Lines. So you can put your ancestor's name in there, and it shows how you connected to all their children. So just for fun, I put Joseph Mast in there, and the 4 orphans came up, and I have DNA relations with every one of them. The most I have is with Magdalena, and the least I have is with John of 1750, but I have with all of them. So Joseph worked when I did that, but see, the people who put it in could have the same misinformation that I have, so don't trust it. So just to look at Johannes and Jacob, because they were baptized, we know they were not yet Amish. Their youngest brother was baptized in 1710. So sometime between 1710 and 1737, when Jacob came, Uncle Jacob came, they transitioned because their baptismal records are there. And we think they were members of the Reformed State Church. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about each one and the children. I put this map up there just to give you an idea of where the 2 uncles settled. So the lower white dot is Jacob of 1737. They're right outside of Center Court, near Molasses Hill. And Johannes is just over the county line. Of course, when he settled there, it was Berks County. It's now Schuylkill County. And later it was Pine Grove Township, and now the land is in other townships as time changed. But they were about, probably if you followed the creek down, North Hill Creek down between the 2 properties, about 12 walking miles, which probably wasn't very far for them, very hard for them, but it was over the mountain. So the Blue Mountains are in between them. And the Mast land is probably about 6 miles from the Hochstetler community there at North Hill, at Charlottesville. So this is Jacob Mast of 1737, and these are the records at Harrisburg for him. And some people think that the Lance, Kaufman, and Masts on this land plot maybe even organized these land purchases before they ever left Europe. Because the Penn family agents would go over there and try to get these people to come who were good farmers. They wanted them on their land. So there's a possibility that that is what happened. And you can see how he's already surrounded himself with some of the other Amish families. If you look for his records in the indexes at Harrisburg, you have to look for his records in Lancaster County because Berks County had not been formed yet. And I've always found the Mast name under M, but you have to think of possible other spellings if you start looking for ancestor records. For example, Jacob Byler is under the P's, Pyler. So I've seen all kinds of strange things as I go through those records. Now, I like to look at what their lives might have been like. So this is the inventory for Jacob of 1737's will. It was taken in March 6, 1772. He wrote the will on January 6th. And he said, I, Jacob Mast, of Bern Township in Berks County, have considered my mortality, yet God be praised in my good understanding. and he took care of his wife. And because of his will, we know that his daughter Anna, his oldest daughter, was from a first wife. And we know who she married from that will. So those of you here in the front who can see some of that, what in this will, in this inventory, tells you something about their life and how they lived? What? They were farmers. You can tell that, can't you? What stands out to me is that large wagon. Large wagon, 2 bulls, 2 collars, and traces. They had some equipment going on, didn't they? So they were literate. They had more than just the Bible. They had other books too. And I wonder about that chest if it came across the ocean, like Nicholas Stoltzfus's did. Wonder what that chest looked like. Love to see it. Yes? What's your question?
What's that sundry household goods? What would that be?
Sundry household goods.
On the bottom.
Yeah, what do you think it might be? Maybe some furniture, maybe some kettles, maybe, sundry. Some household goods.
Up there is also sundry kitchen furniture.
Right. So they didn't
What is
actually
the
do a detailed count, did they?
What is the brand name?
No, it just means some. A number of. Yeah. Yeah, assorted. Yeah, that would be a good way. Anybody know what a bucking tub is? There's a kraut tub there and a bucking tub. It's a way to wash clothes from back in the Middle Ages. And they put a piece of linen or rough linen or whatever over the tub, and they put their ashes or whatever they're going to use to cleanse the clothes. And they put the clothes in the tub, and it has a drain on the bottom. And they have a heat supply nearby. So they heat the water, they pour it, they get the water from the bottom, they reheat it, put it in again, because they didn't wash their clothes very often. And so that was the process that this ancestor was using. I like the 40 pounds of bacon, and it's March, and they still have 40 pounds of bacon. Wonder how much they had before the winter started. So Gerald pretty much went over this, but I have a story. Now, CZ had this story in Mast Family History, and it's also in the 1737 Mast book. So I said, I wonder if this story is true. And, I had to find out. So it's a story of Laura Kaufman. And Anna's son, David, is Laura's father. And it's a grandson of 737. But he married a daughter of Jacob of 1750. So it goes back, this story is both in 1737 and 1750. You can all claim it. So supposedly, this Laura, who lived in Chester County, and her mother were influenced by the new Mormon religion that was growing in Chester County. And Laura's mother was a widow, and she decided to go west with the Mormons when they left here. And the Mast relatives begged her not to take Laura. Laura was 5 years old at the time, but she took her anyway. And this Edward Hunter was the leader of these Mormons. And I don't know a lot about the Mormons, and so and the story in the two Mast books is that eventually Laura married this Edward Hunter, who was 32 years older than her. When she was 20, she married him. And that she was his second or even more wife, okay? So I said, can this be true? You know, can this be true? I said, how can I find out? So my husband and I know a distant cousin of his named Deb, whose husband is very active in Salt Lake City. So I sent her an email. And she sent me back, and hasn't stopped emailing me yet. Because she says, yes, this is all true. This is very significant in the Mormon church because Edward Hunter became the third bishop appointed by Brigham Young out in Salt Lake City. He laid the cornerstone of the temple there, and this is Laura's husband. She's his second wife in the Mormon records. And eventually, this is the Mast side of the story. The Mormons didn't tell me this, but eventually she actually left him, and the Mast side of the story said he gave her a farm there near Salt Lake City. And the records, the Mormon records, do show that she eventually married someone else and had children. So there is some truth, CZ, you know, there's some truth in that story. So I just wanted to tell you, you know, because it's fun to find things that are a little bit different. So Uncle Johannes, in this valley, we've kind of always had the tradition that he was the children's uncle. Where does that come from? This man on this slide is John M. Mast, who lived right up on the hill there in Morgantown, and is probably an ancestor to a lot of us in this room. And he was CZ Mast's grandfather. So CZ got a lot of his beginning in genealogy research from his grandfather. And John M. wrote a 2-page Mast history, and he was talking about the Jacob of 1750 family. So this is what he wrote. He wrote that he lived in Morgantown, that this was written by John M. Mast in his 59th year in 1888. If you want to know the day, it was April the 14th. And I just pulled out the little excerpt that talks about Uncle Johannes and Jacob. Jacob was, and he had 6 years old, and someone corrected it to 12. So Jacob was 12 years old when he came to this country and served his time with his uncle John Mast till he was of age at the Blue Mountain in the year 1750. So that's, I think, where that tradition comes from, that our Jacob here in this valley served his time with his uncle. And that's the earliest record that I have been able to find, is this 1888 2-pager. If you want the 2-pager, let me know. There's some missing. John M., your great-grandfather. So this is the messy puzzle I had to put together when I started finding Johannes's land up in over the Blue Mountains. And I'm just going to go over this quickly because I wrote an article. You can find it in Mennonite Family History, and it goes into a lot more detail about the land. But there were 4 pieces. They're about 400 acres. If you want to drive up there, it's right, Route 895 in Schuylkill County goes right through it. It's on the Washington Township line. It's a beautiful piece of land. Those of you that went on the bus tour yesterday saw it. You were some of the first people to ever step on that land. because we only found it in the last 2 years. So to find Johannes's records in the archives at Harrisburg or online, you have to look for Berks County land that says Blue Hills, because he was over the mountains. So this is what I figure kind of as the timeline for Johannes and the children up there over the Blue Mountains. You didn't have to wait till you had a warrant for the land. A warrant was meant you were wanting a survey of the land. So you didn't have to wait to move on the land. He warranted it in 1753, but they could have easily moved up there soon after they came here in 1750 and started building shelter, clearing land. Then by 1753, Anna and Magdalena were married, so they had moved. So it was just Uncle Johannes and the boys, most likely, working hard. And then Uncle Johannes is still alive in 1754 because he's in the tax records for Pine Grove Township. After that, we kind of lose Uncle Johannes. We don't really hear of him again. But what happened next was, of course, the French and Indian War. So how close did it get to our Mast relatives up there, our Mast ancestors? Extremely close. So a neighbor of theirs wrote to Conrad Weiser in 1755, "We are in the greatest danger because we dare not move either forward or backwards, nor go out to bury the bodies of the dead." So that's their neighbor. And then Conrad Weiser writes about his plan to rescue the settlers north of the mountains, and he says, "If there is yet alive such." So it kind of gives you a picture of why they skedaddled and got off that land and went other places. Now, Anna, one of the orphans, married John Yoder, and they first lived, before they went to Mifflin County, right near Centerport on Shoey Road. There are still Yoders in that community. It's a very Yoder community. And it's, I showed the Church of the Brethren there because this is the day of my wedding in 1980. Let's put that there. It's on, their land is right after the church. So when I got married, I didn't know I was near my great whatever's land. And their children, I just wanted you to see the names, who they married into: Rickenbach, Yoders, Blanks, Peaches, Kaufmans, Hertzlers, Zooks, Hostetlers, a lot of Mifflin County names. So Magdalena, there's probably more misinformation about Magdalena than any other of our ancestors. There's just so many stories. And I want to get his name right. John F. Murray wrote an article in Mennonite Family History. It's July of 2017. And he wrote an update on the Troyer family. And he found some tax records and other things that really help us understand more about them. The main thing I want to tell you right now is that they lived, according to his new research, where the tax records show that his father, Michael's father, was spelled D-R-E-Y-E-R instead of Troyer, Dreyer. So if you look in the tax records, they're next door to each other. And they all left during the French and Indian War, but they came back. So the tax records show that they left. And they show that Michael's father went to York to sit out the war. That's important information because it connects to younger brother John. So kind of remember that there's a good possibility that Magdalena and her husband Michael went with his father and Andreas Hooley and sat out the war in York. There's that little connection there. Not been proved yet, but we do know from the tax records that Magdalena's father-in-law went to York. So again, these names, I love to look at the names: Yoders, Beckers, Leymans, Wengers, Kaufmans, Rickenbachs. You start seeing some different names on these Holmes County records. So our Jacob, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about him because so many of us know, but I do want you to make sure you go to the exhibit room because his wedding frock coat is there, and several of his vests, and also 3 of the original sheepskin deeds from his land down here near Elverson. So make sure it's a good time. It might be one of your only times to take photographs of some of that kind of stuff. And he died in 1808, and of course is buried up at Pine Grove. I want you to look at the names here: Kurtz, 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 and Kurtz. How you like that? You think we're related to the Kurtzes? So, the first Mary and Adam are cousins. Catherine at the bottom is Adam's niece. You know, it was the first stop that we got off on the bus yesterday, was where Adam lived. And then the second Mary, Kurtz, and Susanna are sisters. So sisters married brothers. You might also notice Zook, 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 and Zook. Well, you know, I just think it's funny. The first Christian and John are brothers, and the second Christian and John are brothers. A lot of good times when this family got together. So now let's go to John. And probably this is the one that we know the least about. So I'll just spend 5 minutes or so on him. So he traveled to Randolph County, North Carolina, and he lived there the rest of his life. He never left there. That is not in the Boone area. It is in the center of the state of North Carolina. It's a Quaker hotbelt. He lived in a pacifist community of Mennonites, Dunkers, and Quakers. They were called the Urari Dutch. They all spoke German. Supposedly he married Barbara Harmon. Their DNA is starting to show that yes, he was definitely married to a Harmon. Could have been Barbara Catherine, could have been Catherine, but Barbara is in one of the Mast Bibles from down there as his wife, but it didn't give her surname. And so they're starting to figure this out. We don't know who her parents are yet. When I was looking and searching for his wife, I saw also potential Yoder, Lapp, and Kurtz. So we, don't know. Just don't know yet. But Harmon seems the most likely at the moment. So remember, possibly, young John went with his older sister to York to sit out the war. Why do I say that? Because when he left here, he was married and had little toddlers already. And he most likely traveled down, well, most likely he had to, it was the way to go. The Great Road. The Great Road goes from Philadelphia to Augusta, Georgia. By the 1760s, when he traveled, you couldn't go 10 miles without seeing a settlement or a house or lodging or the Moravian communities. It was already a very established, still rough road, but there were many, many travelers on it. And he went with I say Foots. It could be Fouts. I don't know how to say it. But there was a whole family, and they were from York and had land in what was then York. After this, the Maryland-Pennsylvania line got determined, and they were actually in Pike Creek, Maryland. It's a very strong Dunker community, and they all had land there. The Hoovers went at the exact same time. John Mast, Adam Varner, Jacob Schwartz, and those we know for sure went at the exact same time. It would have been 40, 50 people, including children. And they all registered their land on the exact same day in Salisbury, North Carolina, on February 17th, 1763. Now, how did I find that out? Well, let me just tell you. My sister and I were talking, and she said, "Oh, Dot, you can do this." So, you know Google. I put in John Mast, North Carolina, and up popped the history of the Church of the Brethren in North Carolina. And in there, it tells how all of these people came at the same time. The Fouts or Foots family were Dunkers. The Varners were Mennonites. So there it was in the history of the Church of the Brethren. And it told me what page in the deed books I could find it. And I found them all. And yes, they were all registered the same day. Isn't that neat? And then I put Jacob Stutzman. He registered his land a little bit later. But John Mast of 1750 spent the rest of his life with these people. And his children intermarried with some of these. I'll show you in a minute. His will says was probated. Nobody ever knows when he died, but his will was, no, he didn't have a will. It was intestate. But they settled his account in the court session of August of 1798. So he had to die sometime, probably a little earlier than that. In August is when they did that. It's kind of easy to find out about him down there. And all of these other people from up here, a lot from Lancaster County went, because in the library in Randolph County, there was a lady who just loved genealogy. And there's probably 60 Dunker families in this community, probably about 10 Mennonite families, and a whole bunch of Quakers. And she made a file on every family. So you go into the library, you go to the filing cabinets, you pull out the drawer, and you pull out John Mast. And there's his information. And why did we lose that? I don't know. Oh, I want to show you this map. So this map is also online. Mac Watley wrote a book on the architecture of Randolph County. He wasn't writing about the Urari Dutch. He was writing about architecture and looking at old mills and things like that. And when I put in John Mast of North Carolina, this is about the second thing that pops up. So there it was. And so it's a map of the Urari Dutch. And in the upper left-hand corner, you can find about where John Mast lived, because he most likely gave the land for a church named Mast Mennonite Meeting House. How did we lose that? How did we lose it? I don't know how we lost it, but there it is. And next to him are the Hoovers and Waymeyers, who changed over to Quakers. And there's Jacob Schwartz and other names from up in this area. Jacob Stutzman became the head of the Dunkers there. And there's stories about all of them in the library there. It's just incredible. So, by 1801, all of John Mast's children were gone from Uwharrie Dutch community. This community was very anti-slavery. If you were a runaway slave in the South, if you could get to Randolph County, they would take care of you and get you out of there towards Canada. There's a man from there named Levi Coffin. His entire book is online, and it tells all about the abolitionist activities of these people and as they left there and why they left there. And I'll show you John's children. You see, three of them married Hoovers. His grandchildren married into the Foots family. You can see these same names. Jim is back there, is descended from Nancy in the first row. And I don't know, who are you? You're descended from Joseph, okay. The one that went to North Carolina. Yes. So you can see that all of his daughters and three of his sons ended up in Miami County, Ohio. It's near Dayton. There's a big Quaker community there. And that's where they ended up. They, once they got there, and John and David and some of the daughters are all buried in the Quaker cemetery there. They were not Quakers at that time, but they married into the Quakers. It's unusual for the Quakers to allow non-Quakers to be buried in their cemeteries, but these people were allowed because they were part of that community that became abolitionists, helping slaves that made it to Ohio. Now, you're not going to find records of how they hid them and moved them on to Canada because they could have lost their land, they could have lost their homes if they had been caught. So you don't tell that stuff. But what they do tell is how they would hear of somebody maybe in Virginia that was willing to free a slave. So from Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, they would send a person the whole way to Virginia with the funds to buy that slave's freedom and bring them to Ohio and help them get established. The Quaker records are really detailed on this, and there's a Quaker book that tells all this. And another thing they would do is there were slaves that were freed that were living in Ohio, but some of them were living in really bad conditions. So they would take them food and clothing and help them start schools. And this family was involved in all of that. And how did we lose it? I don't know. I just don't know. And then, as you notice, Joseph is the one that went to Watauga County. Jacob did it first too, but when the wagon train went to Ohio, Jacob joined the wagon train and followed them to Ohio. And if you really want to read some neat stuff, I got to get done here, but if you want to read some neat stuff, there are diaries and journals of their journey to Ohio. They made barrels of noodles and shot squirrels along the way and added the meat to the noodles. I mean, there's just all kinds of incredible details. And so Joseph was the one who went to Watauga. And did they own slaves? Yes, they did. It's a cold experience that I had. I was looking for land records. I went to the land records online, put in Joseph, and his land records come up, what he sold, what he bought. And right there with the land records are the slaves that he bought and sold. It was just like grabbed my heart, you know. And then when I started looking through the land records for all his sons, slaves. And from the Urari Dutch community, there were Bowers and Harmons and others that went up there, all owned slaves. Why they chose slavery and the others were anti-slavery, we'll never know. But there is a book written about slavery, and Lowell, I think, is representing his brother back there, if you want to know more about that. I instead like this story. The Underground Railroad in West Milton, where it names our John Mast's oldest son and others from that community as abolitionists on their historical marker. That's the one I like. West Milton is right outside of Dayton, Ohio. Now, I skipped a part because of time on two of Jacob's 1750 sons, but I will make CZ's letter available to anyone who wants it, where he tells about his sons David and Jacob and their didn't get along too well, and how the one ran a hotel and sold a cigar and whiskey for 3 cents. And the other one kind of had allowed Methodist tent meetings on his land, and maybe kind of caused the split that happened here in the Morgantown Valley. So I'll give this to CZ's grandson right now because he wants a copy of it, and there you go. It's 9 pages front and back because your grandfather was a little loquacious, shall we say. And so once again, I'm going to put my slides up, and I'll be glad to share anything with anybody that I used in my talk, or that I have. So thank you very much.
We actually were going to spend about 10 minutes to give you the opportunity to ask questions and share stories. What I want you to do instead of doing that right now is talk to Dot between now and 1 o'clock. And Dot, then at 1 o'clock we're going to give you some time to tell a few more stories that people will talk to you between now and then. You're exhausted.
I'm just kidding.
She doesn't get exhausted from this. So if you have some major questions or stories, talk to her between now and 1 o'clock. And we'll have more time out in the tent to hear those stories. I have some announcements. Chester Petersheim, a local Amish man, has a horse and carriage out here. And he wants to give all the children rides, of course, at least once or twice, and some of the adults. So if you've never ridden in a horse and carriage, you'll go out here and around. There's a bridge between the church and the cemetery. That's where you'll get on, and he's going to take you back around the country, or back around the church property, and let you off back there again. So please help yourself. All the talks that are being given here this morning over the microphone are being recorded and will also be put on the Mast website.